On a frozen mountainside, 9 hikers tore their own tent open from the inside and ran into sub-zero darkness. Barefoot, some of them missing half their clothes. In a Belgian coastal town, a woman's fingerprints were burned off her own fingertips before she died, and no one has ever learned her real name. A Lighthouse crew vanished mid-meal, their chairs still pulled out from the table, their beds still made. Somewhere above a small Pennsylvania town, something fell from the sky in 1965, and the United States military carried it away before a single photograph could confirm what it was. And in a library in Connecticut sits a 240-page book, written in an alphabet no human being has ever been able to read, in a language that may not exist anywhere else on Earth. These are not urban legends. These are not campfire stories exaggerated over the decades. These are real, documented, extensively investigated cases, and every single one still has an active file sitting in a cabinet somewhere, waiting for an answer that has never come. Welcome to the creepiest unsolved mysteries in existence. Human beings like to believe that with enough time, enough forensics, and enough persistence, every mystery eventually gets solved. We trust that fingerprints identify people, that autopsies explain deaths, that logbooks record the truth, and that governments eventually declassify their secrets. But history is littered with exceptions. Cases where the evidence should have been enough, where investigators got close enough to taste an answer, close enough to see the shape of the truth, only to watch it dissolve the moment they reach for it. Today we are looking at 5 of the strangest, most quietly disturbing unsolved cases in the world. A woman with no identity. A death so violent it defies explanation. A vanishing that left no trace. An object the government insists both existed and did not. And a book that may never be read by anyone ever again. By the end, you may notice these cases share something in common. It is not a lack of evidence. It is an excess of it. Evidence piled on evidence, for decades, that still refuses to add up to an answer. Let's begin with the woman who may be the most carefully erased person in modern history. Our first case is the mystery of the Isdal woman, and it starts, appropriately, with fire. In November of 1970, a woman burned to death alone in a remote Norwegian valley, her face disfigured beyond recognition, and her fingertips deliberately destroyed before the flames ever touched her. Investigators would spend the next 5 decades using everything from Interpol networks to isotope analysis to modern forensic dentistry, trying to answer one single, maddening question. Who was she? And why did evidence spanning at least 9 different countries lead absolutely nowhere? On November 29, 1970, a father and his 2 daughters out hiking stumbled onto a horrifying scene in Isdal, a valley just outside Bergen, Norway, whose name literally translates to Valley of Death. There, they found the badly burned body of a woman, surrounded by an empty bottle of accelerant, a passport, some jewelry, and an umbrella, half melted by the heat. Every label had been carefully cut from her clothing. Her fingertips showed clear signs of having been sanded down or deliberately burned, specifically to prevent identification through fingerprinting, a detail that told investigators immediately this was not an accident. When police traced her movements backward, they found 2 suitcases she had checked into storage at the Bergen train station. Inside, they discovered an assortment of wigs in different colors and styles, several sets of false eyelashes, and clothing with every tag removed, just like the clothes on her body. But the most unsettling discovery was a small notebook, filled top to bottom with a private code. When investigators finally cracked it, they realized it was a detailed travel log, tracking her movements across Paris, Stavanger, Bergen, and beyond, all under at least 8 different aliases and matching false passports. Hotel staff who remembered her described a woman who always paid in cash, always requested a room away from other guests, and always seemed to be watching the door. Her autopsy revealed something even stranger. She had ingested a significant quantity of sleeping pills before the fire that killed her, a detail that has fueled endless debate. Was this a woman who took her own life and destroyed her identity on the way out? Was she murdered and staged to look like a suicide? Or was something else happening entirely? Something involving people who wanted her and her secrets permanently erased? Handwriting analysts who studied her coded notebook noted patterns consistent with intelligence tradecraft, the kind of shorthand used by people trained to leave no trace. It is a detail that has fueled decades of theories that the Isdal woman was a Cold War-era spy, caught in the machinery of an operation that went catastrophically wrong. For nearly 50 years, her identity remained a complete blank. Then, in 2016, forensic dental analysis of her remains suggested she likely grew up somewhere near the German-French border, narrowing down, for the first time, a possible origin. But narrowing down is not the same as knowing. To this day, no government agency, no relative, no historical record has ever definitively confirmed who this woman actually was. Somewhere, there may still be a family who never learned what happened to a daughter, a sister, or a wife who simply vanished in their lives and reappeared nameless in a Norwegian police file. If the Isdal woman represents a mystery of identity, our second case represents a mystery of pure, inexplicable violence. This is the Dyatlov Pass incident. And if you think you already know the story, stay with us, because the deeper details get significantly stranger than the headlines ever capture. In February of 1959, a group of 9 experienced Soviet university students set out on a skiing expedition through the Ural Mountains, led by a 23-year-old named Igor Dyatlov. They were seasoned outdoorsmen and outdoorswomen, not amateurs, fully equipped for the brutal Siberian winter. And then, in the middle of the night, something happened that made every single one of them do the unthinkable. They sliced their own tent open from the inside and ran, barefoot or in socks, into temperatures plunging toward negative 25 degrees Celsius. One hiker was found wearing only a single shoe. Another had no pants at all. Search teams eventually found their bodies scattered across the mountainside, and what they discovered did not make sense. Some victims appear to have died simply from hypothermia, curled up in the snow, but others showed catastrophic internal injuries, crushed ribs, a fractured skull, trauma consistent with a high-speed vehicle collision, and yet there was no external bruising, no wound, nothing on the surface of their bodies to explain how that level of internal force could possibly have occurred. One of the women in the group was missing her tongue, her eyes, and part of her lips, and to this day, investigators have never conclusively determined whether that resulted from natural decomposition in a mountain stream, or from something considerably darker. Then there is the radiation. When investigators tested the clothing recovered from several of the victims, they found levels of radioactivity significantly higher than expected, a detail the original Soviet investigation buried and never explained. The official case file, once it was finally declassified decades later, concluded only that the hikers died as a result of, and this is a direct translation, a compelling unknown force. Not misadventure, not animal attack, an unknown force. It remains one of the only times in Soviet legal history that an official government document used language that vague to close an active death investigation. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the case and eventually pointed to a rare type of slab avalanche as a likely trigger. It is a plausible theory, and it may explain the initial flight from the tent. But it does not fully explain the specific pattern of catastrophic internal injuries without external bruising, and it does nothing to explain the radiation or the missing tongue or why the group, once they were clear of the tent, continued moving further away from safety rather than back towards shelter and warmth. Family members of the victims have rejected the official explanation for decades, and so the question remains, suspended in the same freezing air that took 9 lives in a single night. What did they see or hear or sense that made staying inside a tent feel more dangerous than running unprotected into a Siberian blizzard? From a mountain full of unanswered violence, we move now to the sea, and to a mystery so quiet it is almost worse. This is the disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers, and it begins with a scene that still unsettles investigators today. A table set for a meal that was never eaten. On December 26, 1900, a relief steamship approached the Flannan Isles Lighthouse, a remote outpost off the rugged coast of Scotland, to rotate in a new set of keepers. As the boat drew closer, the crew noticed something wrong immediately. No flag was raised. No light signaled back. When they finally reached the lighthouse itself, they found the front door unlocked, the beds made, the clock stopped, and all 3 keepers gone, without a single trace, as though they had simply stepped outside and never come back. Inside, an unfinished meal sat on the kitchen table. One chair had been knocked over and left where it fell. The state of the bed suggested the men vanished sometime during daylight hours. not while sleeping, which only deepened confusion, because a competent lighthouse keeper does not simply walk away from his post in broad daylight without reason. The logbook, when investigators recovered it, described violent, ferocious storm conditions in the days leading up to the disappearance, and even noted that one of the keepers, a man with a reputation for being calm and level-headed under pressure, had reportedly been crying. And yet, when officials cross-checked mainland weather records from that same window of time, there was no storm recorded at all. Calm seas, clear skies. Investigators did find some physical clues. Safety ropes and heavy oilskin coats were missing from the lighthouse, suggesting at least one of the keepers had gone outside deliberately, likely to secure equipment near the exposed cliffs, a task any experienced keeper would recognize as dangerous but necessary. And more than 100 feet above sea level, investigators found damage to railings and equipment consistent with the impact of an enormous wave, a wave large enough to reach that impossible height, despite the fact that weather conditions elsewhere along the coast that day were recorded as entirely calm. No bodies were ever recovered. No wreckage. No clothing washed ashore. 3 men with decades of combined experience on that exact stretch of coastline walked out their own front door and were erased from existence. Did an enormous, freak rogue wave sweep one or more of the keepers off the exposed rocks, prompting the others to rush to their aid and be swept away themselves? It is a leading theory, and it is plausible, but it does not explain the mismatched weather reports or why an experienced keeper would be recorded as crying in a logbook during conditions the mainland never registered. Somewhere between the sea and the sky, on that isolated rock, 3 men vanished, and more than a century later, the ocean still has not given up its answer. If the Flannan Isles mystery is defined by silence, our 4th case is defined by chaos, panic, and a cover story that has changed more times than investigators can count. This is a Kecksburg UFO incident. And whatever you think you know about UFOs, this one comes with something most cases do not. Dozens of credible, sober, small-town eyewitnesses who never once changed their story. On the evening of December 9th, 1965, a blazing fireball tore across the sky, visible to thousands of witnesses spanning 4 states and part Canada, including Michigan, Ohio, Ontario, and Pennsylvania. Reports flooded in from ordinary people going about their evening, describing a brilliant, burning object streaking low across the horizon before appearing come down in the woods near the tiny village of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. Local residents who rushed toward the crash site described something extraordinary, a large, acorn-shaped object embedded in the ground, with strange markings resembling hieroglyphics banded around its base. Within a remarkably short window of time, United States Army and Air Force personnel arrived, sealed off the entire area, and, according to multiple first-hand witnesses, loaded the object onto a flatbed truck, concealed it under heavy tarps, and drove away before local media could capture a single clear photograph. Local firefighters and volunteer first responders, several of whom entered those woods before the military ever arrived, have maintained the exact same account for nearly 60 years, that they saw a real solid physical object, not scorched tree branches, not a weather balloon, not swamp gas. And yet the official position of the United States Air Force has shifted dramatically over the decades. At various points, officials claimed a meteor was responsible. At other points, they claimed nothing was found at all, a statement flatly contradicted by dozens of independent, on-the-record witnesses from that night. In 2005, a documentary investigation surfaced testimony from a NASA scientist suggesting the object recovered may have actually been a Soviet space probe, Cosmos 96, re-entering Earth's atmosphere after a failed launch toward Venus. It is a serious, scientifically grounded theory, but the trajectory and timing data remain disputed by independent researchers, and it still does not explain why the military moved with such immediate, coordinated speed to remove physical evidence from a supposedly unremarkable meteor strike. To make matters even stranger, government records that should have documented the incident were later reported missing or unaccounted for by NASA itself, decades after fact. What fell into those Pennsylvania woods that night? And why, 60 years later, does the official story still refuse to hold still? Our 5th and final case takes us away from mountains, coastlines, and crash sites entirely into something far more intimate and, in its own way, far more disturbing. Not a missing person, not a missing object, a missing meaning. This is the mystery of the Voynich manuscript, A 240-page handwritten book that may be the single most impossible document on earth to read. The manuscript surfaced in a historical record in 1912, when a rare book dealer named Wilfred Voynich acquired it from a Jesuit college in Italy. From the moment it resurfaced, it defied every attempt at understanding. The book is written entirely in an unknown alphabet, roughly 35 to 40 unique characters that match no known writing system in human history, arranged into words with statistical patterns that genuinely resemble real language, not random gibberish, but something with internal grammar, recurring word structures, and consistent letter frequency. The pages are illustrated with elaborate botanical drawings of plants that, according to botanists who have studied them extensively, do not match any known species on Earth. Other sections depict what appear to be astronomical charts, zodiac symbols, and small human figures bathing in strange interconnected pools of green liquid, connected by tubes and structures resembling something between plumbing and biology. Radiocarbon dating conducted in 2009 confirmed the vellum pages date to somewhere between 1404 and 1438, ruling out theories that the entire manuscript was a later hoax, though it does not rule out the possibility that the text itself is an elaborate, meaningless fabrication created to look like a genuine language. For over a century, some of the finest cryptographers in human history have attempted to break it, including codebreakers who successfully cracked German and Japanese military ciphers during World War II. Every single one has failed. Modern artificial intelligence and advanced computational linguistics have been applied to the text in recent years, identifying statistical patterns consistent with genuine language structure, yet still unable to produce a single confirmed, verifiable translation. Several researchers have publicly claimed to have cracked the code over the decades. Every single claim, without exception, has ultimately collapsed under scrutiny from the wider academic community. So what is the Voynich manuscript? Is it a lost, extinct language, the only surviving record of a culture or dialect erased from history? Is an elaborate medieval hoax, created purely to defraud a wealthy buyer, its author laughing across 6 centuries at cryptographers still trying to break it? Or is it something else entirely, information deliberately encoded to be unreadable by design, protecting a secret someone 500 years ago decided the world could never be allowed to have? The book itself is not hidden. It sits fully digitized and viewable to the public at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Library. Anyone can look at every single page, right now, today, and still, after more than a century of the most rigorous cryptographic effort ever applied to a single document, not one person on Earth can tell you what it says. A woman with no name, erased so completely that not even her own government can identify her. 9 hikers who ran barefoot into a blizzard rather than stay inside a tent, from something that left injuries no avalanche fully explains. 3 keepers who vanished from a locked lighthouse in broad daylight, their dinner still on the table, an object the United States government insists, depending on the decade you ask, both existed and never happened at all. And a book, sitting in plain sight in a public library, that remains completely, totally unreadable 500 years after it was written. What connects these cases is not a shortage of evidence. It is an abundance of it, mountains of documentation, physical evidence, eyewitness testimony, forensic analysis, decades of dedicated investigation by capable, serious people, all of it circling the same impossible center, and still refusing to resolve into an answer. Every single one of these files remains technically open today, somewhere in an archive, an evidence locker, a rare book library, or a mind that has never once spoken up. The truth is sitting quietly, waiting, and maybe that is the most unsettling part of all. Not that these mysteries went unsolved, but that they were, by every reasonable measure, solvable, and after all this time, still are not. If you know something we do not, the comments are open. We are listening. And if this kept you up a little later than you planned, make sure you are subscribed, because the mysteries only get stranger from here.